predator becomes prey in the Florida Everglades as hundreds of hunters descend on the Sunshine State to catch and kill as many Burmese pythons as possible.
Burmese pythons have devastated native wildlife in the Everglades.
They found the first body near a drainage canal. A native snake, mouth open, gasping for air that would never come. Then they found another, and another. Not killed by a predator, not crushed, not eaten. Infected from the inside by a parasite that had never existed in this ecosystem before. A lung-dwelling organism called Rhylietiella orientalis, carried into Florida by an invader so successful, so relentless, that it didn't just eat the Everglades. It rewired them. When researchers set up trail cameras deep in the wetlands of southern Florida, they expected to document the usual suspects: raccoons, opossums, marsh rabbits, wading birds. The kind of footage that fills wildlife documentaries and park brochures. What the cameras captured instead was something that made seasoned biologists go silent. Mile after mile of swamp. And nothing. No raccoons foraging at the water's edge. No rabbits darting through the sawgrass. No opossums shuffling along the tree line. Just water, mud, and an eerie emptiness where an entire food web used to exist. The mammals were gone. Not declining, not struggling. Gone. This is the story of how a snake from the other side of the world quietly devoured one of America's most important ecosystems. How a Category 5 hurricane helped unleash the invasion. How alligators, the undisputed kings of the swamp for millions of years, suddenly found themselves in a war they weren't built to win. And how the footage coming out of Florida's wetlands right now reveals an aftermath that nobody, not the scientists, not the government, not the hunters paid to stop it, ever saw coming. To understand how the Everglades fell, you have to go back to the 1970s. That's when Burmese pythons, giant constricting snakes native to the jungles of Southeast Asia, first started arriving in Florida. Not as stowaways, not as accidental migrants, as pets. Between 1975 and 2018, over 180,000 Burmese pythons were legally imported into the United States, and Miami was the hub of the exotic pet trade. People bought baby pythons the size of a garden hose, thinking they were getting a cool, low-maintenance pet. What they didn't realize was that these snakes grow fast. Really fast. A baby Burmese python can reach 8 feet within 2 years. Adults routinely hit 15 to 18 feet. The largest ones on record stretch past 20 feet and weigh over 200 pounds. When owners realized they couldn't handle a snake the length of their living room, many of them did the worst thing imaginable. They drove out to the edge of the Everglades and let them go. 1 snake here, 2 snakes there. Nobody thought much of it. Florida already had alligators, water moccasins, and every other creature that bites, stings, or constricts. What was one more snake? Then came August 23, 1992. Hurricane Andrew, a Category 5 monster with sustained winds exceeding 150 miles per hour, slammed into South Florida just south of Miami. It ripped roofs off houses. It flattened entire neighborhoods. And it destroyed a Burmese python breeding facility near Homestead, releasing hundreds of snakes into the surrounding swamps. State environmental inspectors reported that thousands of specimens of exotic species escaped their caging during the passing of the storm. The pythons slithered into the Everglades and vanished. Nobody went looking for them. The state had $1 billion in hurricane damage to deal with. The snakes could wait. The snakes didn't wait. They bred. A single female Burmese python can lay up to 100 eggs per clutch. In Southeast Asia, that reproductive rate is kept in check by predators, disease, and competition. In Florida, there was nothing. No tigers, no king cobras, no natural diseases adapted to target them. The Everglades offered warm temperatures year-round, unlimited water, and a buffet of prey animals that had never encountered a constricting predator of this size. It was the ecological equivalent of dropping a wolf into a field of sheep that had never seen a predator. By 2000, the National Park Service officially recognized Burmese pythons as an established breeding population in Everglades National Park. But the real scale of the disaster didn't become clear until researchers started counting what was missing. A landmark 2012 study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences revealed numbers that stunned the scientific community. Raccoon populations in the Everglades had declined by 99.3%. Opossums had dropped by 98.9%. Bobcat sightings fell by 87.5%. Marsh rabbits, cottontail rabbits, and foxes had effectively vanished. The researchers couldn't find a single rabbit in areas where they had once been common. Think about those numbers for a moment. A 99.3% decline in raccoons doesn't mean you see fewer of them. It means that for every 1,000 raccoons that used to live in the Everglades, 7 remain. The ecosystem didn't thin out. It collapsed, and the pattern was undeniable. The most severe declines occurred in the southernmost regions of the park, exactly where pythons had been established the longest. As the snakes spread north, the mammals disappeared behind them like a slow-moving wave of extinction. For millions of years, the American alligator was the undisputed apex predator of the Everglades. Nothing challenged it. Nothing competed with it at the top of the food chain. Then the pythons arrived, and the rules changed. Trail camera footage and field reports began capturing encounters between these two apex predators that nobody had anticipated. Pythons wrapping themselves around full-grown alligators in suffocating grips. Alligators clamping down on massive snakes, only to find themselves slowly constricted. In one notorious incident captured on camera, a python was found with a fully grown alligator inside its stomach. The snake had swallowed it whole, but the gator's claws had torn through the python's body wall from the inside. Both animals were dead. These aren't isolated events. Python hunters working the Everglades regularly find pythons with alligator bite marks on their bodies and missing tail sections. The two species are locked in a war of attrition that neither evolved to fight. A large male alligator can crush and consume a python, but a large python can suffocate and swallow a mid-sized gator. The pythons aren't replacing alligators as apex predators. They're creating a second apex predator in a system that only had room for one. And the collateral damage is everything else in the food web. Here's what makes it worse. Pythons aren't just eating the same prey as alligators. They're eating the alligator's food supply out from under them. Panthers, raptors, bobcats, all the native predators that shared the ecosystem are now competing for dramatically fewer prey animals. The pythons didn't just join the food chain, they dismantled it. When scientists first documented the mammal decline, they assumed the damage would be limited to direct predation. Pythons eat mammals. Mammals decline. Simple cause and effect. But the Everglades don't work that way. Every species in that system is connected to every other species through invisible threads. And when the pythons ripped out the mammals, those threads started snapping in directions nobody predicted. Researchers studying ground-nesting birds and turtle populations discovered something strange. In areas where pythons had been established the longest and mammals had virtually disappeared, nest predation rates actually dropped. Dramatically. That sounds like good news until you understand why. Raccoons, opossums, and foxes were the primary nest raiders in the Everglades. With those mammals gone, fewer nests were being destroyed. But that temporary reprieve masked a much darker reality. The entire food web was restructuring itself around the absence of mammals, and the long-term consequences were completely unpredictable. Then came the disease connection. A study on mosquito-borne viruses in the Everglades revealed that the disappearance of mammals was changing which animals mosquitoes fed on. Before the python invasion, large and medium-sized mammals like raccoons and deer accounted for roughly half of all mosquito blood meals. By 2016, those mammals made up less than 2%. The mosquitoes didn't disappear. They shifted to rodents, specifically cotton rats, which happen to be amplifying hosts for the Everglades virus, a pathogen that can infect humans. In other words, the pythons didn't just threaten wildlife. By destroying the mammal population, they inadvertently increased the risk of disease transmission to people. The snakes were reshaping the Everglades in ways that reached far beyond the swamp. Florida's response to the python crisis has been unlike anything attempted for any invasive species in American history. The state launched 2 elimination programs, one through the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission and another through the South Florida Water Management District. Together, they employ roughly 100 contracted python hunters who patrol designated lands across 7 counties. These aren't weekend hobbyists. They're a team of bankers, lawyers, alligator wrestlers, and former military, all united by one thing: they're good at catching snakes. The job is exactly as dangerous as it sounds. Hunters typically work at night, driving slowly along levee roads and canal banks, scanning the edges of the pavement with spotlights for the telltale gleam of python scales. When they find one, they grab it behind the head before it can react. There is no hesitation allowed. One hunter described catching a 17-foot python by jumping on it in a roadside ditch, all 110 pounds of her against a snake as long as a pickup truck. She won, but not before it sank its teeth into a vein in her arm, producing more blood than the observer standing next to her had ever seen. Since the programs began in 2017, hunters have removed more than 13,000 pythons from the Everglades. The annual Florida Python Challenge draws participants from around the world, offering cash prizes for the most and the longest snakes caught. Donna Khalil, one of the state's top hunters, has personally caught more than 850 pythons. She summarizes the math simply. You have to kill one animal to save over 1,000. But even the program's own managers acknowledge a hard truth. Current estimates suggest there are anywhere from tens of thousands to 300,000 Burmese pythons living in South Florida. Nobody knows the real number because the snakes are almost impossibly difficult to detect. They're cryptic, camouflaged, and spend much of their time hidden in dense vegetation or submerged in water. One study found that trained search teams walking directly through areas known to contain radio-tagged pythons detected the snakes less than 1% of the time. You could be standing 5 feet from a 15-foot python and never know it. Recognizing that human detection alone can't solve the problem, researchers have been testing increasingly creative methods. One team outfitted raccoons and opossums with tracking collars rigged with mortality sensors. When a python kills and eats one of these sentinel animals, the sensor triggers, leading researchers straight to the offending snake. Another program uses live rabbit pens as bait to lure pythons into the open, where they can be captured. The rabbits are fed, given water and toys, and put up for adoption afterward. Dogs have been trained to sniff out pythons, and their ability to detect the snakes far exceeds that of humans. Researchers have also experimented with tracking the snake's movements using radio telemetry, following individual pythons to discover breeding aggregations where dozens of animals can be removed at once. One researcher following a tagged snake discovered a female guarding a nest of 111 eggs, with 25 more still inside her body. Perhaps the most unsettling discovery came from a tracker that simply stopped behaving like a python. Instead of the slow, winding movement typical of a large snake, the signal began moving faster and in straight bursts across the swamp. When researchers reached the coordinates, the python was gone. No scales, no remains, no signs of a struggle. The transmitter was still broadcasting, but now from inside another animal. The python had been consumed. The leading suspect was a massive American alligator, proof that at least some of the swamp's original rulers are fighting back. And there may be another unexpected ally. Recent reports from the Everglades document bobcats actively raiding Burmese python nests and eating their eggs. The same native predators that pythons nearly wiped out may be learning to turn the tables, destroying future generations of invaders before they ever hatch. The footage coming out of Florida's swamps today tells two stories simultaneously. The first is a story of devastation. Vast stretches of wetland emptied of the mammals that once defined them. An ecosystem restructured by a predator that was never supposed to be there. Trail cameras capturing mile after mile of beautiful, thriving habitat with almost nothing living in it above the waterline. An ecological collapse that happened in plain sight while the rest of the country wasn't paying attention. But the second story is more complicated, and in some ways more unsettling. The Everglades aren't dying, they're transforming. The food web is reorganizing around the new reality. Bird populations in some areas are shifting. Reptile dynamics are changing. The relationship between predator and prey is being rewritten in real time, and nobody knows what the final version will look like. The pythons didn't destroy the Everglades. They created a new Everglades, one that no scientist alive has a model for, and no conservationist has a playbook to manage. The python hunters will keep hunting. The researchers will keep tracking. The annual challenges will keep drawing crowds. But every expert involved acknowledges the same uncomfortable reality. Eliminating the pythons entirely is almost certainly impossible. The best outcome anyone can hope for is management, keeping the population low enough that native species have room to recover. Whether that's achievable remains an open question. Meanwhile, the snakes continue to spread north. Researchers believe that a mild winter could allow pythons to expand their range significantly up the eastern seaboard. What started as a few released pets in the 1970s has become one of the most devastating biological invasions in American history. And the footage still coming out of the swamp suggests the full aftermath hasn't been written yet. Somewhere in the Everglades right now, a python you will never see is swallowing something that was supposed to live there. And the swamp is a little emptier than it was yesterday.